right, welcome to the Media Roundtable, special edition where we're diving deep into the inner workings of the audio industry in service of the Chief Audio Officer. That's the marketers who are responsible for the success of their audio program. It's a narrow lane, but that is what is great about podcasts. And I'm your host, Stew Redwine, VP Creative Services here at Oxford Road. And today we're joined by a very special guest, Joanna Robinson. Let me tell you a little bit about Joanna. She's a writer, podcaster, and cultural critic for The Ringer, appearing on several shows, including the House of R, Trial by Content, the Prestige TV podcast. She's a former senior writer for Vanity Fair with multiple cover stories to her name, featured panel moderator at marquee events such as South by Southwest, Con of Thrones, Mill Valley Film Festival, and more. She's been profiled in the San Francisco Chronicle, IndieWire, and Recode Media for her work on pop culture. And she is the author of the MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios, which I just finished listening to yesterday, I believe, or the day before. It's been keeping me company on my dog walks, and it is, like it was called in Publishers Weekly, and I agree 100%. It is the definitive account of the Hollywood juggernaut. It's like required reading and super entertaining. She's self-described as one of Cameron Crowe's uncool, an excellent, almost famous reference. And in 2019, SyFy dubbed her the Queen of Game of Thrones. So hopefully there's an Iron Throne made entirely out of pins and podcast microphones for her. I would love to see that. Hey, Joanna, does that brief bio capture just some of the highlights, or did we miss anything, Joanna?
No, above and beyond. Thank you. Blushing. Thank you.
You're most welcome. And so we're going to be discussing, like we were saying before, what it's like to be on the other side of the microphone. I think that's so important to anybody when we're talking about audio and audio ads. It's like, hosts are people too. Okay, so let's talk about the reality of that when you're handed that stack of paper and like, no, bring this to life and connect it to my audience. How do we cultivate connections? Because I think there's so much of what you've done and what you love and comes through so clearly that relates also to advertising. Like, products are very complex, just like these universes. Okay, but how do I get someone to fall in love with that? And how do I not lead with all of the facts about, did you know that Ford's, Model T was like, go deep cut? Like, how do I bring people in? How can you super serve with joy? And you do seem so joyful. I mean, you are joyful. It's
Thank
obvious
you.
that you actually love this stuff. And I love that, like the almost famous touch point. Because that is how your story comes across, as like this fan, this person who actually loves this stuff that now gets to like pinch myself. I get to do this for a living. So like, what is your view? What is your hero origin story for Joanna Robinson?
I love that. It literally wasn't until you asked that question that I thought about the way in which Almost Famous is my favorite movie far and away. It's about a young journalist who gets a sort of rude awakening into the world of journalism from the perspective of fandom on the road with a band. And I think the way in which I started doing this was I was an avid commenter on a pop culture website called Pajiba. And the person who runs that website, Dustin Rolls, one of the greatest humans of all time, sort of plucked me out of the comment section and just said, I like the cut of your jib. Like, will you do some writing for me? And then it all sort of went from there. I worked for them, and then I worked for New York Magazine a little bit, freelancing, and then I started working for Vanity Fair, and now I'm here at The Ringer. And I think that idea of always being on the lookout for where an interesting opinion or voice might come from. I don't know. That's something that I've always believed in deeply, that a fascinating opinion or a fascinating fact could come from any listener who tries to get in contact with you. And I never sort of put that together, that is also what happened to me. That is someone who, I never went to J school, I never went to film school, but I was someone who, just had a keyboard and an opinion, and someone took me seriously. So, yeah.
And so that's cool. The connection point that was your origin story. That's also the thing that you watch out for, I guess, as you were in be starting to do this professionally, when is it you recognize, like, I love the Ira Glass quote that's about, I'm like, the theme of the quote is that essentially, like, we have taste, like people that want to make stuff, like commercial artists, like people that want to make stuff or comment on stuff, like we have taste. That's what gets us into it. But then it takes a while to develop the skill or the craft to actually do stuff at the level that we respect and appreciate. What was that kind of like for you, where you recognized even in yourself that, like, I've got something special and I've got a distinct voice and point of view I can bring to the table?
As someone who has massive imposter syndrome, I don't know that I can ever sort of cop to that, but
Okay.
I will say that, uh, you know, the external support I got from various editors was that my voice came across very clearly in my writing. And that's the advice I try to give anyone who comes to me as a writer asking, what can I do? And I think it's about authenticity. I think it's
Yeah.
about just being so much yourself that you can't even possibly hide it. And that's what people respond to, because I think people can smell inauthenticity or pretension or any of that. And it can be off-putting. And so I think in order for your voice to ring through, it has to be something you genuinely have passion for. And so that's something that I've been lucky enough to be able to do. And I think once I moved from writing into podcasting, that became even easier for me, because when you're speaking extemporaneously, I don't really love to go off. Some people can podcast off a script. I can't. I'm not great at it. I'm very stilted, and so I have to be extemporaneous, and then then I have to be authentic. So I have no choice. If you can do it off a script, do it off a script. I can't do it. So yeah.
It takes all kind, but see, know thyself and be free. So if you had a fan reaction where you that had validated that about like that, so that's your North Star, like, to my own self be true, like, let me come across with Joanna's voice and have clarity in my voice. Have you had like a favorite or gratifying kind of reaction from the fans of Joanna that has validated that? Or how is your own fandom you've created of you? What's your experience of that been like?
Podcasting or writing or any kind of working in isolation job is so disorienting, because I know from the numbers how many people listen to our shows, but you don't really get a sense of it until you do something like you go to a convention, or we went on a book tour last year, and then you meet all these people. And that's just sort of a stunning, staggering thing to experience. Something I think that's so fascinating about podcasts, and this has been studied endlessly, is the idea of intimacy that it creates, because people so often listen to podcasts while they're doing something else, while they're folding the laundry, or while they're on their commute, or whatever it is. And so then you become this friend in their ear. And so meeting people who talk to me like I'm their friend, which is just lovely, or talk about the way in which the work that I do helps them connect with other people. I've heard from daughters and dads who listen together, long distance friends who listen, and then we'll sort of, get on the phone and talk about what they just listened to, so the way in which my, silly opinions on film or television, whatever the case may be, helps people find community. That has always been the most gratifying thing to me. So, yeah.
And that's awesome that you see that. And that is the like inherent intimacy of the medium. Like you're saying, it's where, like, just, I mean, it was an audiobook, but just this last week in prepping for this, like I said, I devoured the MCU book. And it's like, and then you did the opener to that, you voiced the opener to that. And then for me, it's like when I'm listening to it, I know your tone of voice throughout the thing. It's like, yeah, you feel like you know these people, but you don't know these people. But it's cool that you honor and respect that that's the dynamic that's going on.
I've never had a bad interaction, so I'm very lucky that way. I'm sure plenty, I mean, it happens, but it's never happened to me. Everything has always been, at least in person, so lovely. And yeah, it's a really lucky thing that we get to do. I take it really seriously.
And that comes through. You've got such an awesome attitude about all of this. And so something that struck me is, like, in the 2018 Vanity Fair article with Amelia Clark, like, you open with a fandom moment, right? You open on a if you know kind of moment, where you're talking about if Harry met Sally. She's talking about if Harry met Sally, and you guys connect on that. and then there's some other like niche movie, at least to me. And I'm like the guide you guys must have had on that day where it's like, oh, I need to add these things to my watch list. So it seems like, every fandom has like very qualified language, and that can leave people feeling like outsiders. Like, how do you see it as an entry point? How do you see the complexity of qualified fandom language as an entry point, where you seem to use it as a way to like welcome people in, where to others it might be an obstacle, or others might come at it as from an elite standpoint as an obstacle? Like, how do you use it as a way to welcome others in?
Well, first and foremost, I think gatekeeping anything, any fandom, any passion is idiotic, because when you want to share the thing you love with as many people as possible. So that attitude, which certainly is prevalent in a lot of the fandoms that I've worked in, I don't truck with. But I think that it's sort of built into what I've done, which can be described as sort of explainer culture, this increasing, sort of lucrative, if you can, side business to the stories that we love, of like, okay, you watched the thing, you're a little confused, you didn't read the book, I read the book, so let me tell you what the book can tell you about what you just watched. That really got started when I started covering Game of Thrones, and I was lucky enough to be right at the beginning of Game of Thrones and just happened to have read those books. And so I was able to talk about this thing that then became the biggest, cultural phenomenon in the world for a couple of years. And so getting in early on that trajectory was really, really helpful. But I just think that I've seen people try to do it in a way that is too dense for people to understand. Like, they're sort of too far into their own fandom to even think about the fact that they're talking to someone, not at someone. It's really interesting. When I was
Yeah.
hired at the Ringer a couple of years ago, this thing that they like to say when they are looking for people to work at the Ringer is this: they're trying to hire the smartest sports fan at the bar. They slightly modify that for me because I'm not a sports person, so they say like your smartest friend at the bar. So the idea is, the bar part is, you're in a relaxed environment, you're just trying to explain something to someone, hopefully in a fun and entertaining way, to invite them in. You're not trying to impress them or overbear them with how many more facts you know than they do. That's just not the attitude I think that one should have in this. So yeah.
And it's because, again, I tie it back to like, because you actually enjoy it and you believe they would enjoy it. So your motivation isn't to impress. You're standing in their eyes. Like, your self-worth isn't on the line.
Right.
It's that like, this is really cool. It's very enjoyable. You should get into this as well. And that's so like the connection to me that it reminds me of is like, when we're working on advertising campaigns and you've spent time doing voicing ads and then,
Mhm.
having ads in your shows and all this stuff, is like, that's what we're setting out to do with an advertisement, is make the complexes and make it simple. And like, you think of something as simple as a radio tower, right? It's like, it's 40,000 kilowatts or whatever it is. Like, we can go so far into all the technical
Mhm.
specifications of this microphone, which is actually really cool and exciting as you start to dig into it and learn about like the technology or the ins and outs of any space. But it's like, how do I connect with people and create that intimacy with them, even if I'm trying to explain something, as any kind of advertisement that I'm trying to explain. What I'm wondering about, when you, as a host on the other end of like receiving talking points or like a packet, like,
Yeah.
did you find, like, what was your like love hate moments with that aspect of the business?
I think when you're looking at copy, the best case scenario is just a few bullet points that they want you to hit in your own words, and then, host experience. If an advertiser can actually furnish you with a product, so you actually do have, you're authentically talking about something you have experienced, and then you can talk about it in a down to earth human kind of way, that is my favorite ad read to do. If you get if you get ad copy that's just like a full page of bullet points and there's a highlighted instruction of must read word for word, I can do that for you, and I can try to infuse it with as much warmth as I can, but I'm not sure how believable that is. And certainly if it's riddled with facts and figures that may not mean much to the person listening, then to your point, it goes back to that idea of sort of alienating people with too
Yeah.
much information rather than drawing them in with just the right amount of information that they need to hear to be excited, intrigued, engaged, etc.
Yeah, like it's cool when the lore is like so deep. Like I've got a couple high school kids, and they're like really into the whatever Friday Night at Freddy's stuff,
Yeah.
and so the lore, the lore. I'm like, the lore. I'm like, what are we talking? You mean the story? I don't, we weren't talking about the lore of Empire Strikes Back. Like it was like, it's like you're talking about the story. You talking about like the planet. Anyway, but I think of that with advertisers, like you're saying, like you're like, oh, I need to give them all this information. But hosts are people too. You if you fill the page with a bunch of facts and figures, like you're saying, you're like, yeah, sure, I'll hit my line. I'll say, I'll hit my mark. I'll say my line. But in order for you to truly personalize it as a host, you're saying you want to be able to experience the product yourself. What have been some advertisers you can think of where it's like worst case, best case scenario, even if you don't name the product, of like where you were really able to make it come alive, or where it was more of a challenge to make it come alive?
I mean, I'm not saying every company can afford to send you their product. If you're doing an ad read for a car, I don't expect you to send me a car, but I will say it would be nice. But I will say that I can think of 2 different sort of through the mail mattress companies that I've done ad reads for.
Okay, perfect. And great. So this is case by,
one of them sent me a mattress. They were sending every podcaster a mattress like a couple of years ago. So like, they sent me a mattress. The other one sent me like this is like a couple of years later, like almost like a kitchen sponge size swatch of what the material of the mattress is made of. So, which ad read, I had that first mattress for probably longer than I should have. And I slept on it every night, and I could talk to you about what it was like to unbox it. I could talk to you about what it felt like to sleep on it. I had that full experience. And then with the other one, I just have this little like, purple swatch of space rubber. I don't know what it was, but I can again read the bullet points, but I have no personality that I can infuse into that beyond what they write for me to say,
Yeah, completely. And so like your ideal, it's like, yeah, like we've got to give them the personal experience, which is sort of like comparing it back over to Fandom is like experiencing the joy of being at that movie or watching that show and feeling those good feelings about it. So, okay, experience the product. And then it sounds like you're saying you want, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to guess like 3 to 4 bullet points in
something
a script.
Like that. Yeah. I would say you start tapping out when you see like over 5. Over 5 is when you just start saying, okay, you just
spot on.
You just want me to start reading things off the page. Again, I will do that, and I will do it, willingly, but it's not going to be as good as it might be. And it's to your point about that personal experience. It's funny. I was just putting the notes together for our the episode we're about to record for Dune 2, which was an incredible cinematic experience. And something I sometimes
haven't seen it yet.
Okay, no,
I'm holding out.
No spoilers or anything like that. But something I often forget to do that my host reminds me is she's like, you forgot the section at the beginning where we talk about what it was like to watch it and whether or not we liked it. Before we get into the lore, as you put it, she's like, they want to know if we liked it. And I was like, oh yeah, I forget that sometimes. And so that's important because people are emotionally invested in your emotional investment into something. So yeah.
All right. So tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies: Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
Yeah. And that's absolutely. And I find that same thing in advertising where, like I said, we have another show that we do called Ad Infinitum that's focused solely on audio ads. So you want to talk about like a fandom, it's like this niche group, but kind of same thing where, just our recent guest was Mark Pollard, who's a strategist, awesome strategist from Australia, now in New York. And we were talking about that kind of dynamic of being like, what, we do make all this stuff and we think about all this stuff and we talk about all this stuff, but like, did you like the ad? Like sometimes did you just think it was cool? And you don't have to defend why or go into all the other stuff, so it's good to keep that in mind. So what I want to do, speaking of that, it's kind of the cross section of advertising and entertainment is like a trial by content style discussion about, like I said, the crossover of like audio and radio and TV and movies. So you're the trial by content professional, obviously. I'm just going to mention to you a couple that came to mind for me.
Sure.
Where like, these are movies that to me depict, audio or audio advertising even specifically. And so I'll go through the list and give you a little blurb of why. And then I'd like to hear like, if what you think of these and like maybe others that come to mind for you.
Yeah.
So Good Morning Vietnam.
Yes.
So what I love about Good Morning Vietnam is Robin Williams. You see how hard someone could work. Like you go back to the beginning of radio, how hard an individual can work to help transfer emotion in the theater of the mind over the airwaves. So that's that one. I thought that was so cool. City Slickers. It's hilarious because this guy's in his 40s, turning 40. It's Billy Crystal turning 40, and he's a radio salesman, and he's like having a midlife crisis, and he's like, I sell air. And like, and then then his buddy plays this horrible ad for him. Pizza guy, come on down to pizza guy. He's like, did you make that? Did you sign off on that? People are wrecking their cars. Like, so that's a good one. And then
Nice.
One more, I'll just mention one more, a very recent one. Killers of the Flower Moon. At the end of Killers of the Flower Moon, when they went in, well, spoiler alert, I guess we're not an entertainment show. All right. So this is an audio advertising show. At the end, when they do the radio drama scene, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I just thought that was so cool. Like
brilliant.
That was a whole thing, man. That was a whole, like the whole industry around that. And it's so powerful. So those are three that come to mind for me. What say you?
And it's so funny when you think about those old radio dramas, it's often like, this soap company or this flower company or this baking powder company or whatever brings you this story. On that note, one that I love was from a few years back. Robert Altman did a film version of A Prairie Home Companion. And again, that is a radio play. So getting to watch these like old pros who've done it for so long, getting that sort of backstage experience with
That's
them.
a great one.
I thought that was such a good one. On the long list, just in terms of like what audio can do, I do think that the sequence in Sneakers, a perfect film.
Okay, you and I are yes.
Just a perfect film. And I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. So the sequence in Sneakers where, Robert Redford has to describe what he heard in the trunk of a car to a member of his team who's blind, who has spent more time listening to things. and they're narrowing down by the seams on the various barrier bridges. And he says he hears a cocktail party, and he's like, "Oh, I know you were at the reservoir." Like, it's just cinema at its finest, honestly.
It really is. It is. And then
So
the when they're doing they're looking in the window, and they're
Yeah.
all watching. They're watching. He's like, "Don't look. Ding. Listen."
Yeah.
And if you stopped and just listened, you realize a key piece of information where it's like, oh my God, the guy says something that then you realize the thing on his desk is
It's not an answering machine.
It's not an
Yeah.
answering machine.
Yeah.
Right. I use service, but you do not call. It's like that. You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Okay. Okay.
Be a beacon. But I think also, but the number one for me, the thing that got me so excited about podcasting in the first place is the TV show Frasier. Like, I was obsessed with Frasier as a kid, and so the perceived glamour of working in a radio station, but more than that, being sort of like a fixture in a community, and also that idea of being in conversation. Like, my shows aren't call-in shows, but we do read listener emails all the time, and I do always like to think of it as a conversation you're having with your audience rather than talking at them. There's something wrong with talking at them. Some people are really good at it. There are some, like, the snootiest film critics in the world. Some of them are friends of mine, and I like the way that they sort of imperiously hold forth, but that's just never what I've been interested in. And I just always like to make it a conversation, which is what, Frasier is there to help you with your mental health, and I'm doing it via superheroes and Jedis, but hopefully it's something similar. So
It very much is something similar in my book. So if we're so Prairie Home Companion, that was a great example. Trial by content, do we have to like make one of these win, or can these all be winners?
I think we both agree that it's sneakers. Well, sneakers on just sort of the like audio novelty front. And then in terms of as a radio show, I'm almost tempted to go with your first one, which is Good Morning Vietnam, because there's just something so Robin Williams in that film, and what he's trying to do in the audience that he's trying to reach.
Yes.
Just takes it to the next level. So why don't we give like 2 awards, the sort of more straightforward radio one, and then the specialist sort of audio special effects category we could do.
Okay, that works. So
Yeah.
So the straightforward one is Good Morning Vietnam. That's
Right.
the big winner.
Yeah.
And then the specialist niche, like the sneakers fandom, which I'm so glad you're a member of.
Oh yeah.
It's sneakers. Yes, no question. I just love that so much. I like when I find a fellow sneakers person, you want to talk about, like, it's a moment. Like you and I.
But that's
and
the
that
thing
soundtrack.
Yes. The piano. That is the thing about pop culture. This is what you're experiencing right now. The moment of meeting someone who responds the same way that you respond to a certain story.
Yep.
There's just something like that locks in where you're sort of like, I know a lot about who you are if you're a sneakerhead. I really do.
Exactly. No, we have a lot of, like, the Venn diagram of us is like lined up. And so is it too romantic to think? I don't think so, right? To think that one has those same experiences with products and services.
They certainly can. I think they certainly can. And I think, I'm a podcast listener as much as I am a podcaster.
Okay.
And so listening to some of my favorite hosts, there's something really lovely about repetition in terms, I mean, I'm not an AdWiz, obviously, but like, advertisers know this. They know the power of a jingle. They know the power of a slogan. That is just true. But there's also this power of repeated interaction. So there are hosts that I know that will have an ad read for the same product, but they're encouraged to extemporaneously read it, sort of ad lib, give their own personal experience. So to listen to them every week talk about the thing with sort of joy and excitement, but differently every week, then there's the rhythm of familiarity, but also the joy of experimentation along with it. And so that it does feel like, here's the moment. Okay, you guys know what time it is. It's time for us to talk about this product. We do it every week. We're going to do it again. And there's just something like quite joyful and connective about that, where we're routine. We don't necessarily have a lot of repeat advertisers that we read in our current shows, but something I have noticed is that the listeners love a recurring bit. They just love a bit because then they feel like they're in on the joke with you. So if there's just a joke that you repeat, then they love repeating it back at you. They love tweeting it at you, emailing it to you, yelling at you when they see you in person, all that sort of stuff. And so that repetition, that rhythm, that familiarity makes them feel like they're in on it. And so I think I don't know, obviously, from an ad level, the various strategies of when to scatter your ad over various different shows or investing in the same show week after week after week. But I will just say, as a consumer, I think that there is power in that repetition, that familiarity.
I mean, I can tell you that there is, absolutely. And I think you highlight something good where it's like for the chief audio officers that are listening, you know, where it's like hosts are people too, right? You're talking as a person who's a host and then also a person that listens to podcasts, like that magical connection of like, oh yeah, they're obviously saying the same thing. Like, oh, like this is an ad. We realize what's going on. It's what keeps the lights on in here. But that genuine, intimate connection and the energy they're able to bring to it, to whatever degree they do within, you know, different hosts have different tonalities, whatever. But it's like, okay, we're trying to set them up for that. So how can we set the hosts up to be able to deliver that? And I have to believe, and I feel like you're on the same page with me here. It's like, if I'm giving them this, if I'm giving them 6 pages,
No, yeah,
that's tough. That's tough sledding.
yes.
But if I tell them like, hey, make sure you say the call to action and these are the 2 key points. And then like, hey, we really just want to hear like this week, what was your experience like? Like,
Yeah.
you know, how do I convey that? Like, have you found as a host, I know you're not doing as many live reads, but have you found as a host when you were doing reads, did it help to have some external force, whether it was the agency or the advertiser or a prompt on a page? What was the thing that, what I'm trying to get to with this is, did there have to be an external thing that goes, hey, Joanna, please personalize this week over week? Or is that just something that's inherent in a person? Or did you see that it was helpful if like a script was really short and it said, hey, make sure to do a new intro each week? Or was it helpful if they reached out to you and were like, hey, make sure to do something different? What were the dynamics that ensured that? Or is that something that some people just do?
I mean, I'm sure it's something that people just do, but I think it can also be tempting to just fall into that rhythm. So I think a little reminder of, we would love a fresh, spin on this each week. I also I loved the ads where we were encouraged to read them in tandem, sort of make them a conversation between hosts rather than just sort of, okay, at the end of the record, Joanna, you stay behind for 5 minutes and do a couple of ad reads by yourself. So if you can make it conversational, I think that's a fun way, that then it can't help but feel fresh every time. And then I think in terms of outreach, in terms of onboarding phone calls, which I've done plenty of with various advertisers, again, if they're more asking me what questions I have rather than sort of reading a script out to me of facts and figures that I have in front of me anyway, so I can already read it. I feel like some of those calls are like, we want to make sure you actually read this sheet of paper that we sent it, so we're kind of going to read it at you. I don't find that necessarily additive to the experience, but if they call me and they're like, hey, what questions do you have about our product? Like, we would love to talk to you about it. I think that is a way to sort of spark my curiosity and my enthusiasm about something. So
It's really interesting. The connection I hear in both of those is like, one, you're like, what will make a read better? And it's really what we're talking about, like the overarching theme of all of this. What will make a read better is a conversation between 2 people. You just said, you essentially are saying what makes an onboarding better is a conversation between 2 people. And it's like, whether it's a product, a service, or some fandom that we're so excited about, we can't help but share with the world. It's like the magic, the way to make that happen is a conversation. It is a 2-way street, right?
I think people, especially post-pandemic, but honestly pre-pandemic, are so thirsty for connection. And that's an opportunity in advertising, certainly, but it's also, what makes podcasting often so powerful is that, people feel isolated in their day to day and just want to feel connected to a community, to a host. and when you're trying to put your product, I was a bookseller for years before I did this, so I know something about, like, you want to put a product in front of someone, but it wasn't like I want to sell anyone any book. It's I want to put the right book in the right person's hands so that when they come back, they trust me and they will take my next recommendation. If you put any book in anyone's hands, then they read it, they don't like it, they don't come back, but you want to, like, develop this relationship with them. So then you're a trusted source of information. That requires a conversation. What's the last thing you read that you loved? Tell me about you and who you are, and then I can connect you with a book that you might like. So.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's called The Reign of Marvel Studios, MCU, by Joanna Robinson, Dave Gonzalez, and Gavin Edwards. That was my last favorite read.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
but you're spot on. You're spot on with that. So I wanted to ask you,
Mhm.
and then we'll kind of recap here. Because you do so much in fandom and you're steeped in stories and all that, put you on the spot a little bit here. Like, what's your idea for a story that's got like audio at the center of it?
That's it. Well, I mean, this is gonna sound like such a cop out, but why isn't there a Sneakers 2, and can we center it on Whistler, the character of Whistler?
Okay. You win.
Dan's right there, it's still around,
Oh,
still
he's
working.
still around.
We could do it. So yeah,
you catch up with him,
Sneakers 2, still sneaking, whatever you want to call it.
but then it's like, it seems like it's just going to be him, but then it's like, we got to get the band, back, together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're like, yeah, Stu, I know what I'm doing.
No.
Okay, so this has been awesome. Thank you for coming on the Media Roundtable, and I think we, like, seriously very excellently threaded the needle of making the complex simple, having genuine joy about things. So to kind of recap for our chief audio officers, it's like, hey, hosts are people too, so make sure you equip them with, have a conversation with them. Turns out they want to have a conversation with you. They're people. I give them a short list of bullet points that I'm going to assume. I mean, I know you and we all know what that means, I guess, but I'll just say it is that it's succinct and it's brief and it's pointed so that they can do the thing that only they can do in connecting with their audience. And I think it's also it's important to remember it's the hosts are the ones that have built this relationship with their audience. And so you're relying on them to connect. And I really like your idea too of it, whenever you can, try to create a conversational ad where it's like two hosts talking or a host and a producer, but like that's a super tactical point, but like could also really be easy to forget. And it's not actually asking that much more.
No, in fact, it's easier.
But it makes you more fired up.
Yeah, it's easier to knock out an ad read with your co-host than to sort of sit there and then you're like, oh, did I flub that line? I got to do it again. I got to do it again.
It's so antiseptic. So, yeah. Sometimes it is so antiseptic.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are truly a joyous person, and I see why you've had so much success and going, I'm excited about this thing. Do you guys want to play too? I'm playing a fun game. Do you guys want to play too? And people are like, yeah, I want to play. So where are the best places for people to find you, Joanna?
I'm still on Twitter, and I still call it Twitter at Joe Wrote This. Or you can find me on the Ringer podcast, Prestige TV, House of R, Trial by Content. We're in your ears every week. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you for joining the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com. And I also want to give you a plug for our creative-focused audio podcast, Ad Infinitum. Ad Infinitum is Oxford Road's audio creative-focused podcast, hosted by yours truly, Stew Redwine, VP Creative Services at Oxford Road. And I suggest you start at episode 1 to get a better understanding of what makes audio ads work and how they can work better. Each episode breaks down real, recent audio ads from top spenders across podcasts, radio, streaming, and even SiriusXM. We featured expert guests like Amanda DeMarco from Veritonic, Dallas Taylor, the host of 20,000 Hertz, and Richard Schotten, the author of The Choice Factory. And we just launched season 2, and maybe we'll have Joanna Robinson on as a guest on Ad Infinitum as well. That would be cool. So thanks again for joining us, and to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, and special thanks to Ezra in prepping for this episode, to Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. Thank you all. And as always, influence responsibly.